Hi, Mike Kennedy with you here, and I thought we'd go down memory lane a little. And why we're going down memory lane is because 110 film is being made again. So any cameras that used 110 film, they can be used again. Lomo is making film. This is one of their early black and whites, where it's funny they forgot to number the paper backing, which is kind of important. But now they have several different films. But let's just look at a cartridge. 110 cartridge. The idea was drop-in loading. And the idea behind this was that the film and paper was wound up on one side. It would travel through this chamber, which actually be where the image would be formed, the lens. And they would project the image onto this. You'd snap a picture, and then you'd wind the camera again. There are these little gears that are going to mesh in with the gears in the 110 cartridge, and you're going to take pictures. So this is an extremely simple example of it. Now, I'm going to show you this. We did some video on these before, but someone had some questions, so I'm just going to show again. Here we've got a really nice and small Voigtlander 110 camera. This was actually manufactured by Rolly. And the question was, how do the batteries go in the flash and what do they take? Well, it took me some time to figure out that the back of the flash opens up and it takes two AA cells. Okay. Now there's a battery inside of this too. I think it's an A76, I'm not sure. But this was a really compact camera. It's fixed focus, but you had two aperture settings and it had an electric eye to expose the film more correctly. Okay. So this is a really nice small camera. But I guess you would say its limitation might be the fact that it's a fixed focus. So they came out with other cameras too. Now here's a Canon, one of the top of the line Canon cameras that came out at the time. You can see it's significantly bigger, but this had a f2 lens, which is a pretty fast lens for a camera like this. And also it has a focusing scale and a rangefinder, so you can look in here and you will see the yellow square, and you match that up with the regular part of the image. I've just focused on something, and I can tell you from this that is 2 3/4 feet away. Okay, so this camera allowed you also to imprint the date on your pictures. There was a wheel here to do that. You could turn that on and off. The film advance is here, and again, you'd use the drop-in 110 film cartridge, would fit in the back, which for some reason now I'm having a little trouble opening this. There we go. It helps if you go the right way, but again, you can see the film would drop in here. Now what's interesting to note on 110 is there's a little catch here, a little feeler, and that's because 110 film has actual holes in it. There's a square hole by where each image is going to be taken. And they've actually pre-exposed the 110 film to have this block around it. And then this pin, it travels through and the camera stops when it senses the film. So this gave you some more possibilities. You did have a flash with this as well. But yeah, and here's even a flash extender. If you're familiar with cameras that much, you'll know that the closer the flash is to the lens, the more likely red eye will be. Okay, so we want to avoid red eye. So if we were taking a picture of a person, we could mount this on the camera, and then we could mount the flash higher up. So that would tend to reduce red eye of a close-up subject. And then one of the really great cameras was the Pentax Auto 110. This was an SLR. In other words, you look through the lens for focusing. You've got this back window to show you the numbers that are on the paper backing. And this had a lens that focuses from infinity to 0.35 feet. Okay? Or from about 1 meter to infinity. But this was rated as one of the best lenses that were ever on a 110 camera. I think these two lenses too, the Canon 110 ED. There were different versions of these cameras, and I'm sure the lens on this wasn't a slouch either, made by Rolly. But it's a big advantage being able to focus and get closer images if you want them. So I came across this, and this is kind of what I wanted to mention about. This is a jazz camera. This is a 110 camera. And I wanted to discuss maybe the philosophy behind the idea that why all of a sudden we could have single-use cameras, okay? And how they worked and what allowed them to work so well. So basically we have here, this is more or less what you would find in a single-use camera, except for the fact that it's made so that we can actually put film in it, okay? This would have taken a AA battery. Oh, there it is right there. A AAA battery. AA. We'll just put that in. It's got this handy little piece of cloth, so it's easy to take the battery out. Here we have a roll of Kodak Gold film. Expires in 2004. So this is only 12 years out of date. But let's just take a look at it. We'll just put it in the camera to show you how it works. Kodak film would always come sealed in another envelope, because it is important what gases the film is exposed to, okay? So that was an idea of keeping it fresh. Now this is actually gold 200 film. Now a lot of cameras in the early days, they only had ASA 80 film, and then they came out with 200 and 400. So sometimes with an older camera, it's geared to expose film at 80, and you're putting a roll of 200 in instead, and really, that doesn't really matter. You would think it would matter, but with modern color negative emulsions as they've progressed, it's not going to affect your image at all, at least not that you can tell in prints. Maybe if you did actual densitometer and enlargements, you could tell. But basically, so here we have, this is a multi-use camera, but it's pretty much designed after a disposable camera. It only has one shutter speed. There's no electric eye like we saw on the Voigtlander. With the Pentax 110 Auto, the actual exposure was measured through the lens. And you can see here with this Canon, this round, that would have been the electric eye. So this doesn't have an electric eye, and you're stuck with one f-stop. And so why isn't that a problem? Well, it's not a problem because of the idea that I just told you about, that later, as these single-use cameras can be developed and used with basically one exposure setting for everything, because the enormous latitude of color print film. So it's very easy to get acceptable images out of cameras that are, the film can be overexposed like 4 or 5 stops, or underexposed a couple stops. So basically they would pick a median exposure value. Now let's see, I'm not sure this one will tell us what it is, but a lot of times it was 1/25 of a second at f11 or f8. And let's see, they're saying here that it's a 22 millimeter lens. It's f8, and the shutter speed, I don't see the shutter speed. Maybe I'll have to look online and find out what that is. But we know it's an f8 lens. And you got to know too, as the negative gets smaller, you're comparing a 13 by 7 millimeter frame to a frame, say in 35 is 24 by 36, and 2 1/4, the 120 roll film, the image is often 60 millimeters by 60 millimeters. So the smaller the format of the camera, the more depth of field there is. And that's another reason why it becomes less critical that you have a focusing lens because the depth of field is so great, especially if you're going to stop the lens down to f8. And again, they've done what many single-use cameras did. They've included a flash with it. Now it's interesting because this camera is transparent. We can see this capacitor in here. When they had single-use cameras and they come into the photo finisher where I worked, we'd take the AA batteries out of them. You know, some had 2, some had less, but we could have all the AA batteries we wanted. But the problem was, and why they advised people not to do it, is once this capacitor is charged up, to make an electronic flash works by the principle that this is a tube filled with xenon gas. You have to have this really high current jump through the xenon gas to bring it to an excited state where it emits light. In other words, an electronic flash. So you need quite a bit of power to do that. And you do that by this gradually taking the power from the 110 battery, the 1.5 volt battery that we have, and going into the flash. Now you can see nothing's happening here because the battery's so old that it's not going to work for us. It's not lighting up here telling us that the flash is ready. But what I did want to tell you is, as people would get into these single-use cameras to get the batteries, you could make contact between those 2 contacts at the back of the capacitor, and you could get a really, really nasty shock. I never heard of anyone being killed by it or how serious the injuries were, but if you were to take a screwdriver after this charges up and bridge that thing, you're going to see this really big arc, and there's going to be a burn mark on your screwdriver. So it's extremely important that you don't fool around with the electronics in these unless you really know what you're doing. And these were fairly good capacitors too, so they would hold their charge for months. So in other words, you'd have a bunch of these cameras, people took the batteries out, that capacitor was still fully charged, or maybe not as fully charged, but was charged enough to give you a really nasty shock. So what we've got as our base principle now to review is the quality and latitude. Latitude means the ability to film to be over or underexposed and still produce an acceptable image has drastically improved. So all of a sudden now we can, I would have guessed the shutter speed is at 125th of a second, but I'll maybe put that in the comments below if I can find it, because it doesn't say here. But having that one shutter speed, we count on the latitude of the film. In other words, if this has got 200 film in it and we take it outdoors, it's going to be several stops overexposed. If we put 400 film, it's going to be even more overexposed. But overexposure doesn't tend to be a problem to get acceptable prints. Now, once you start going into little light, there's not as much latitude on the other side for low light, so you had these built-in flashes. So basically, I'm showing you this just to represent the error of when the disposable camera came in, the single-use camera. It's funny, they changed the name from disposable because that sounded really bad in the world of recycling, to single-use cameras. And then a number of manufacturers came out. Oh, look, we have charged up here. We have charged up. Now, I'll probably have to advance to the first frame before we can get there, but let's try that. There, we're on our first frame. In the back, we can see a number, and I'm not going to point this directly at the camera, but there. So that battery, being at least 12 years old, sitting in there, was able to charge up the flash. So having the camera designed the way it was, you could take pictures in very bright light and into less and less light, and finally ending with a flash for real low light situations indoors where the amount of light just won't register that much of an image. So there you have it. A little bit about single-use cameras, 110 film in general, and two, the fact that to let you know that 110 film is being made again. So many of your older cameras can be used again. You have to check into the availability of batteries for some cameras.